Thank you for tuning in to ICT on PNC, a podcast covering issues that impact the Texas insurance industry. The Insurance Council of Texas is a nonprofit trade association serving the property and casualty insurance industry. We're proud to be the largest state-based insurance trade association in North America. Welcome to ICT on PNC.
Welcome to today's podcast. It is Thursday, January 21st, here in beautiful Austin, Texas. My name is Albert Betts. I'm the Executive Director of the Insurance Council of Texas, and joining me today for an enlightening session on the Texas Legislature is Jay Thompson, ICT's General Counsel for AFACT, and longtime insurance lobbyist and insurance lawyer, well-respected, well-known here in Texas. Thank you, Jay, for joining us.
Thank you.
And also Ms. Angie Cervantes. Angie's been with ICT actually a year last week. And so Angie is our Manager of Government and Legislative Affairs. Angie has over 10 plus years experience in the legislative arena, including with the Senate Business and Commerce Committee and as a lobbyist. So Angie, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
So today we want to kind of give you a quick sneak peek at the 87th legislative session, which began back on January 12th. Talk a little bit about what's happened so far and about what to expect over the next 140 days. Sessions are here for one purpose and one purpose only, to pass and create a budget for the state of Texas. But somehow in that process, we end up doing quite a bit of other things, not only on PNC, but other issues as well. So let's talk a bit about what our legislature looks like this session and some of the events, key events that have already happened. I'm going to turn to Jay and let you kind of speak to that.
Well, when we talk about the makeup, we usually talk about division between Republicans and Democrats, even though in Texas, I would say there's a lot more nonpartisanship that takes place at the Capitol, particularly in the House. We have 83 Republicans and 67 Democrats, pretty much the same number as last time. In the Senate, it's 18 and 13, so there's one less Republican than last time. And normally the Senate will, in their makeup, they'll have a 2/3 rule to try to get consensus. When they went from 21 senators, which is 2/3 of the 31, they moved the rule to 60% when they had 19. And now they've moved the rule down to
18.
18.
And that is interesting to see that. My last session when I worked for Senator Corona was when they moved the threshold. It used to be 21, so when you say the House needed more consensus, it definitely used to be the Senate. So.
And I would say that doesn't usually make a lot of difference except on a few controversial issues, mostly social issues and stuff. They have to suspend the rules and get enough votes in the Senate to bring up a bill out of order. The first bill is always the budget, Senate Bill 1, but if they take any bill out of order, they have to suspend the rules. And you'll see a lot of bills 31-0 where they suspend the rules and take it up. And there probably will only be a handful where there might be some issue that they have a difficulty getting a bill to the floor. The House is not that way. I think you'll see a lot more chairmanships with Democrats in the House than you will in the Senate. We have a new speaker. Dade Phelan was elected. I think there were 2 Republicans that voted against him. Were freshman Republicans.
2 freshmen, they didn't know any better.
And the deadline for members to submit their wish list of committees is tomorrow. So he takes that list, the speaker does, and then he'll appoint committees. In the Senate, the lieutenant governor names those. Angie, I think, working in the Senate, that's already out.
Yeah, those are usually, they don't change very often. And in the House, is it seniority gets some weight, right, and then preference? Is that how it works?
That's right.
Okay.
Speaker has appointments, and then you have seniority appointments, and then you have the member's choice, which are the different criteria. So the speaker will make his appointments, and then there'll be some seniority. You'll get to a committee. You may not get a chairmanship, but you may get a committee based on your seniority if you want to be on a specific committee. I'm not anticipating a lot of changes in the House except for appropriations where John Zerwas left. And Giovanni Caprigliano has been acting as chair during the interim. And the budget is a huge undertaking. They usually start hearings in the summer to put together a budget, both the House and Senate committees. It would not surprise me to see him continue as chair. He's a Republican. The State Affairs Committee will be an open committee in the Senate, in the House, because Dave Phelan was the chair of that committee. And then in the key committees that we're interested in, the Business and Industry, which is where workers' comp bills go, and the House Insurance Committee, well, we may see some new chairmanships there. Not sure. I think Trey Martinez Fisher was chair of House Business and Industry. He's a key player and has got some seniority. I think he was one of the early members that signed the pledge card to help Phelan become Speaker. So those are the key committees that I think we're looking at.
Do you want to go on the record to put your wager on who's going to be House Insurance?
No, I don't. I know that there's some members that were early in Dave Phelan's selection process that would like to be chairman, and I think Representative Lucio from the Valley is currently the chairman from last session. I'm sure he would like to continue that in some way. He was not really an early supporter, but there's always late trains and things. So, and then a lot of other factors that go into consideration on that. I don't anticipate that we're going to see those until probably the first week in February, maybe even the beginning of the second week in February before we see House committees named. And I've heard that the Senate committees are not going to start meeting even though they've been appointed until February. That's what I'm hearing.
And Jay, just for clarity, on the Senate side, the Business and Commerce Committee is our primary committee that we follow. Obviously, there may be others that deal with certain issues, but that's where most of the P&C bills end up going, and that's Chairman Hancock again,
Yes.
heading up that committee.
Kelly Hancock from the Fort Worth area, Dallas-Fort Worth area, will continue as chair. The only change that I saw on the committee was Senator Judith Saffarini has been on that committee the last two sessions, and she was not reappointed to that committee. Instead, Senator Johnson from the Dallas area, who took the Corona seat and subsequently Huffines,
Right.
Nathan Johnson will be on that committee. He's a Democrat. It's still the appointments by Lieutenant Governor Patrick. There's a majority of Republicans on virtually all of the committees. The only Democratic chair is Senator Whitmire of Criminal Justice, who's been in that position for a long time. And he's one of I think he's the dean of the Senate now, the longest serving member, and certainly is recognized by the other members as an expert on prison and criminal justice. So I think him being the chairman of that, he certainly has the respect of that subject matter in particular.
Okay, so session is off and running. It's 140 fun-filled days and nights, particularly as we get near the end. Let's talk a bit about how that process works. What are some of the key timelines that help drive the process and help, as we often talk about, either let us know bills are dead or bills are on life support or bills may be subject to amendment as we get close to the end of session. I was quickly calculating before we got in here how many sessions have I been involved in some capacity or another. And I believe it's 12, if not 13. And I know, Jay, you beat me on that. You've been involved in more than that, and Angie, you've been involved in a few. So we've all lived it in different ways, in different capacities. But you sit down and you look at 140 days, and you think, "Oh my God, this is going to take forever." And then you look up and it's day 139. You're like, "How did that go so fast?"
And the last 30 days feel like 140 by themselves.
Yeah, that's true. At the end, with all the various deadlines you're trying to keep
Yep.
track of, it is a sprint to the finish. But let's talk a bit about how the process works, some of the key deadlines, particularly how the committee hearing process works. And given COVID, what we've seen, or at least what we understand will happen in terms of how the legislature will conduct business this session.
Well, I'll start, Angie, jump in here in time. The deadline, the 140 days is in the Constitution, where they start for 140 days. And in the Constitution is the 60-day deadline, where the legislature cannot consider any bill in the first 60 days unless it has been declared an emergency by the governor. Now, I know Angie worked in the Senate, and the Senate can suspend those rules if they get enough votes. It used to be 2/3. And so we used to see the Senate jump out of the gate early, hearings, kicking bills out of committee, kicking bills over to the House. Typically, the House doesn't consider any bills that are not emergency before that 60th day, and that's March the 12th. And so that's also the deadline to file bills without a agreement to suspend the rules. And you see very few suspensions in the House. You don't see many in the Senate either, because
No.
there's so many. There's going to be over 7,000 bills filed between probably now and March 12th. And so then the month of bills can start being heard after the committees are organized. You usually see that in February, and then March will be very heavy with hearing of bills and stuff. Some of the key bills after March, though, will be the appropriations bill. Maybe some of the redistricting bills may be heard in March or on the House floor. A bill has to get out of committee and recommended to a calendar in the House. There's two calendars, the regular calendar and a local calendar. In the Senate, the calendars committee is the lieutenant governor.
Pretty much, yes. So in the Senate, it goes to the lieutenant governor, and then he decides what gets recognized. We also have a Senate administration does a local calendar, and I think it's a little looser typically than maybe what the House considers local. Any bill that doesn't have much opposition can be put on this this other calendar, and then the Committee on Administration sits around and essentially looks at the bills, and they could either certify it to just pass, or they can kick it off, and then it has to go to the floor. So.
And each of the houses have their own rules, the Senate rules and the House rules, and they've adopted those rules. They haven't updated their calendar of events, but typically a House bill has to pass a House calendar usually in the first week, sometime in the first week of May, which means it's going to have to be voted out of committee sometime in the end or middle of April, recommended to a calendar, and then be on a calendar for it to be voted out by that week in May. There'll be a hard deadline. Usually it's around the 6th or 7th of May, where bills, even if they're on the calendar, if they haven't passed by midnight, they're dead.
Yeah.
And then the Senate will have similar deadlines, but they tend to be a little looser there.
Right, the House deadlines and all these happen in May, and so that's when, from the interest group perspective, if you're wanting to pass something, you're hurrying up, wanting to get that before the deadline, or crossing your fingers that it dies and misses a deadline.
And then the deadline will be a little bit later for bills on a local and consent calendar. Those typically are uncontested bills, non-controversial. They have to be recommended to be on that in the House. The Senate also has a local and consent calendar that they will put on there, And if there's one objection, you can knock it off in the Senate. So a lot of times, if it is controversial, they don't take a chance of putting it on a local calendar.
And the new chair of administration, which handles the local calendar, is Senator Schwartner. Just got appointed.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a bit quickly about the hearing process. We hear about all these hearings happening, they're scheduled, bills are going through, but what is a legislative hearing from your perspective? How does a legislative hearing actually work? If you're not doing this for a living, a hearing you may think of a legal proceeding, and that's not what this is. It's more of a, what I call it is, you got your tribunal of 9 or however many members are up there, and then an opportunity to present evidence on a bill or in support or against a bill. So talk a bit about that process, the way it used to be, and then maybe how that goes this session, given our restrictions on gathering.
And I can take the Senate. The Senate and the Senate and House hearings typically are run differently. Also because Senate committees have a much larger staff than House, and they're usually there year round. And so typically the chair of the committee decides what bills to hear. So a bill will get referred to a committee, and then the chair will have discretion of what bill to hear on what day. Typically, in the Senate, they meet about once a week, and then when things start to pick up around the end of March, they might start having 2 hearings a week. And in the Senate, things tend to be grouped, and I know at least that's how Business and Commerce would work, where you'd have an insurance day, so all the insurance bills that they decided they were going to hear would be on there, or electricity day, things like that. And essentially, it's if you want to testify, if you're not, you have to submit. You could submit written testimony, and that gets entered into the record, and you could go before the committee and just say, keep it brief and say your 2 pieces about whether you're for or against the bill and why, and then they take cards also, so you can submit, just register your position, and then ideally all that gets taken into account. And so usually after the committee, they don't tend to vote out the bill right away. They might hold it for one meeting to where people look at it and see if there needs to be any substitute language. So if a witness comes and there's some negotiations going on behind the scenes, they will have to offer a committee substitute. And that happens, I think, in the Senate a lot more, where they tend to try to do their work in the committees and make the bill whatever they want it to be, rather than amending it on the floor. And I think, Jay, the House is a little different, right? The House will amend on the floor a lot more.
I think that's right. I think the other difference between the House and the Senate, the Senate has probably done more of their homework on the issues of the bill before it gets to hearing, and even though they've allowed public testimony, and any member of the public that supports or is against a bill can do that. And you would see interest groups like insurance groups bringing agents, and then trial lawyer groups bringing a lot of their clients in to testify public, and the rooms would be packed. You could hardly move in it. And then if you did testify, you were given 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. So the Senate has put people on the clock unless you were invited. So that will obviously continue, but the large groups in the packed rooms, you won't see those anymore. And for lobbyists that are paid to be there, paid to testify or to do things, I think you're going to see less of that in form of testimony. The Senate rules require you to have a COVID test showing a negative test within 3 days before you can enter the Senate. The House is not requiring testing right now, but they're going to limit the public testimony. They want to limit that. They want to limit these crowds of people coming in. We used to see like a Doctor's Day or Agent's Day or Title Insurance Day, where you'd see literally hundreds of thousands of people walking around the Capitol, going office to office on their projects. We're not going to see as much of that. You'll probably see more of the lobbyists on key issues, and I think they're going to be working through their contacts and getting written testimony or getting information. And you won't get quite as much in the form of public testimony by listening to hearings. Those are all going to be available online where you can probably hear a committee hearing and hear who's testifying for or against it. But it's going to be more behind the scenes.
Yeah, I remember, I'm going to divert here a little bit. First time I went up, and I didn't know it was Doctor's Day, but it was Doctor's Day, and need to get in the Capitol, so there's this long, you know how this works. All the doctors show up. They all are wearing their white, they're not called
coats.
smocks, coats. They're all wearing their white coats, and I walked up and I'm like, why are all these doctors here? Because there's a line out the door to get through security. And then I would always, from then on, make sure I never went up on Doctor's Day because they are out in force.
Yeah, every Tuesday, first Tuesday of
Yeah,
every month.
Probably early on, I didn't realize that. So
Doctors and realtors,
Yeah.
those are, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Let's talk about some of the issues our legislature is going to be dealing with this session, and not PNC right now, but just big picture issues that are really going to drive the agenda and the discussion, as these are statewide issues. And Jay, you mentioned redistricting, which the public kind of watches, I think, but doesn't really understand what's happening, which is members are in effect drawing their own districts.
That's correct.
For future elections, and I won't get into detail, but I remember some very interesting discussions I happened to be privy to early 2000s about redistricting and some theories and strategies that were going on. And as you can imagine, this is it's a very contentious at times and very strategic process. This is about control of the legislature moving forward. So redistricting is one issue. Potential special session issue, do you think, if they can't work it out?
Yeah, and the redistricting process is more complex than just redistricting, because if you think about a House member and he's in a certain district, and let's just take here in Austin, where you have a district that runs from South, then Onion Creek, all the way around the city up into Lakeway. Pretty far distance away, but the member that is there is currently a Democrat, but that used to be a Republican district. And so they know within that line, those district lines, the precincts and how people have voted. So they're going to want to see the map to see which precincts they can get in, and they want as many of precincts that will vote for them to be included in their next district. And so within the party lines, the Democrats are looking at it. They're going to use the Voting Rights Act to say, hey, you don't want to hurt people's voting rights, and particularly minorities. And the Republicans are going to want to make sure that they've got some safe districts so that they look at their numbers. So each House member and then each senator will look at that, and then each member of Congress. And you'll see members of Congress strolling through the Capitol.
It's the only time you see them lobbying for themselves.
Lobbying
yeah.
for themselves and what their district is going to look like. And then you'll have some redistricting with the appellate courts, typically done by legislation. So that's not as big a deal as the maps that will be drawn. If you think about it this way, there's 31 senators, and the population of the state of Texas, 28 million. So a Senate district now is larger than some congressional district in terms of number of people. And if you started at the very top of Texas in the Panhandle area and said, okay, where are we going to get to 600,000 people from there? Well, you have to draw a lot of counties and pick up Amarillo and go over to do that.
Yeah.
If you started in the Houston area and drew it, well, you get that number pretty quickly, so then it becomes line drawing. And where you start dictates a lot of where you finish and stuff, because you want to have those reasonably the same. And the same is true of the House members in their districts. So that will be you can tell already that that's going to be a hotly contested, contentious issue. During the rules debate on the House, there were probably 10 or 15 amendments offered by the Democrats to require the House to pay for lawyers and to pay for experts for them in the committee process and put that into the rules. And those amendments didn't pass, but you can already see the battle lines between Republican and Democrat on the redistricting through the rules itself. So that'll be big, a big issue that will take a lot of time. And then, obviously, they pass a bill that does that, and so the House bill will then have to pass the Senate. The Senate bill will have to pass the House. They may not be liking each other. Sometimes the House and Senate don't get along.
Sometimes that bleeds into everything else, too.
They may not like what they've done to their maps, and may go to a conference committee and then have to be signed by the governor. And if they can't agree, then it's going to go to it'll go to the governor, lieutenant governor, controller, and 5 people, then they'll draw the maps. And if it experiences any indication, then whatever is finally drawn is going to go to federal courts. One side or another or both will be in federal court.
Well, you may recall early 2000s, members leaving the state of Texas during the middle of a redistricting fight. But beyond the deciding who has what district, the budget. Obviously, given COVID happening last year, we have a significant budget deficit here in the state that'll lead to questions and issues about how do we fund state services, how do we fund education, and other governmental operations. So I think the budget, would you agree, budget will eat up a lot of time if the legislature is not talking redistricting, they'll be working on the budget.
I think that's right. That's the one bill they have to pass to fund the government for the next 2 years. There's also going to be a bill, one of their tricks has been to fund certain high-dollar health and welfare services such as Medicaid. And I think the last session they funded it through April. So between April and the end of August, they're going to have to pass a bill this session to fund those type of services and other services that were not funded through the biennium.
Right.
So that's going to be one of the first bills that passes. And then that's one of their tricks on how they can get a budget certified without making some big cuts. I know that Governor Abbott has required all the state agencies to reduce their budgets by 5%. And I think that has resulted in some fairly substantial savings. And so the $1 billion deficit being projected by Comptroller Hagar, I think the differences are going to be what cuts, if any, go to higher education, go to education. And the education funding is very interesting because the state has assumed a bigger share of education funding so that school districts don't have to rely as much on property taxes. And there's where the deficit's going to come through. Are they going to come through with that, I think? And that's going to be a huge fight.
Okay. Yeah, those budgetary tricks, I remember them well. So COVID-19 obviously overriding a lot of the discussion as well as we talk about how the state responded, what agencies can do, and then what has it meant for the state overall. And then the governor's priorities. He hasn't officially named them, as I'm accustomed to the governor laying out his priorities, but
When does that typically happen? Does he
it's
usually
right
goes
about
and-
it's right about now or
Okay.
next week or so, typically.
Yes, when he delivers the state of the state.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is in a couple
But
weeks.
so, as I understand it, last week at the Texas Public Policy Foundation meeting, he seemed to lay out priorities, at least in his remarks, and those dealt with looking at telehealth and telemedicine issues, COVID-19 driving that discussion, but also public safety and police funding, as well as, here's Austin in the news again, city lobbying, the use of public funds to lobby by governmental entities. So we need to wait and see what he officially announces as his priorities, but so far that at least seems to be getting the most attention. So I think those will drive the discussion as well. So let's move into P&C, what our folks are primarily interested in. We don't, at least my impression is we don't anticipate a very heavily dominated PNC session. It's probably not on the minds of most members because there are much more pressing issues that we just talked about. But if y'all could let's talk about the few issues we've either seen already in bills filed. I think right now, Angie, correct me or not, if there's like 150 bills that we're already tracking or somewhere near there related to PNC. But let's talk a bit about what we're seeing so far, at least what we've heard rumors of coming out during session. And Angie, if you want to kick us off, let's talk about what these state agencies actually recommended as part of their biennial recommendations.
Right. So before every session, all the state agencies are required by statute to submit a list of their wish list for legislatures to consider. And typically these get picked up and made or turned into bills by usually the chairmen of committees and things like that. This particular session, DWC was very light on their recommendations. They only had 2, and I think one was eliminating some reports that they do. TDI had a list of things, as well as OPIC. And did you want to get in the weeds about them? Or?
Well, I think hit on the highlights. We'll probably have another session where we kind of get into the details, but TDI seemed to be related to changing some regulations regarding agents and adjusters, and then some statutory regulations on companies who provide coverage in underserved markets. And
As did OPIC.
Yes, and OPIC had the same. And then the NAIC model law on reinsurance. Jay, you want to talk a bit about?
Yeah, I think that was number 1 on the TDI's list. What they don't want to talk about is that is required for TDI to continue to be an accredited insurer by the NAIC. But this would expand the list of eligible reinsurers that a Texas domestic could buy reinsurance from. And I think this is a priority for them and will be for some large domestic insurers that do business in Texas, do business nationwide, but they're Texas domestics. I think some of the other things are not real big items. The rate things you talked about were certain insurers that provide insurance in underserved areas and stuff were exempt from having to file a big actuarial justification for their rates. And both TDI and OPIC want to eliminate that. It's expensive to have to hire actuaries and provide all that deal, and a lot of these smaller companies just have a market rate and they look at their solvency.
And TDI's, I think, extended, it was both auto and home, and then OPIC focused more on auto.
Correct.
Yep.
And I think some of the other things on the agent licensing is maybe make it more streamlined. Some of the issues that we're a little concerned about are the after a catastrophe, having a non-resident licensed person come in to help adjust claims. Like if you have a Hurricane Harvey, you have thousands of damaged structures and you need adjusters to go in quickly to adjust those losses or adjust losses for vehicles. You may have to bring them in from out of state. And if they're going to have to wait to get a license to be able to do that, that may slow the claims process down. Now, I know that TDI is sensitive to that, and hopefully that legislation will be structured in a way that does that. Right now, we don't have the bill, but that is one of the things that they were looking at. And I think the other things were just requiring some additional ethics training for agents and those kind of things.
And on the personal line side, beyond the TDI's recommendations, there's probably 3 or 4 issues that we're already seeing pop up in bills. Some are repeats from last session, dealing with auto repair requirements or restrictions, particularly regarding using aftermarket parts. And then I think last week we saw a bill filed to deal with replacement cost coverage and mandating some changes to how that is handled. And then, Jay, we've seen a repeat of the, I'll call it the litigation bill, but the UM-UIM litigation bill filed by Representative Guerin last session has resurfaced this session. So I know we'll be taking a very close look at that, and then obviously keeping an eye out for anything that changes the litigation environment for our members here in this state, either by making litigation easier or more costly, or expanding any of the bad faith laws. So anything you want to add to that, Jay?
I might just mention that I'll call it the commercial trucking tort reform. There's a coalition of truckers and others that are deeply concerned about both the number of lawsuits and the size of the verdicts that is creating tremendous problems for the trucking industry in Texas. And they have a coalition that will have some legislation that I'm sure will be opposed by the trial lawyers. I mean, it's hard to watch TV and not see the ads. You've seen the ads, and they've been successful because of not only an increase in litigation, but the verdicts. And so I think there will be some things that will hopefully restore some balance there. I mean, it's not going to stop truck wrecks or accidents, but it's going to restore some balance where maybe there will be cases that will be easier to settle and won't be as with these huge nuclear verdicts.
I'm smiling as you say that, because even my daughter, when she was home for Christmas, she got sick of those commercials. They came on so many times. At some point, she goes, "How many times are they going to show that same thing?" So then I gave her a quick lecture on on insurance and nuclear verdicts, which probably not what she wanted to hear at that point. COVID. Let's talk COVID a bit again, because there's some legislation related to COVID, and in response to that, we've already seen a bill to mandate or at least ease coverage requirements for business interruption insurance. And then I think on the workers' compensation side, correct me if I'm wrong, there are some bills to expand the presumption of coverage or presumption of injury for COVID-related exposures. Typically, those deal with law enforcement and other public employees, but Angie, I think this time we've actually seen a bill that expands that coverage, or at least that presumption, over to nurses.
To nurses, yes, and that's the one that we're watching all of them, but that we've definitely flagged that one as significant. And then, like you said, on BI, Senator Schwartner filed a business interruption bill over in the Senate.
And that bill is very troublesome because if you offer business interruption, you have to cover regardless of whether there's a physical loss. So if the government shuts you down, you have to provide that coverage.
And it was retroactive too.
That even in some other states, I have not seen any state go that far, and it would be very difficult for carriers to provide that coverage. It was almost like terrorist coverage after 9/11, where the federal government stepped in with a layer. And I think the national trades, they've done a pretty good job on working that issue and communicating already on that. I saw something from Leanne Alexander that's gone to the committees explaining problems with that bill. But that's one that I think needs some education, because that's filed by a Republican, and I've talked to a lot of Democrats that had businesses that think they should have gotten insurance money for that, even though there was no physical loss to the building. So those will be very important bills that we'll need to be watching.
Okay. And finally, a subject that's near and dear to our heart, coastal wind insurance issues. And that's usually referred to in the four-letter word TWIA. But let's talk a bit about what we've already seen filed on that, what we can anticipate. It's an issue that occupies a lot of our time because the insurance industry companies have to be members of TWIA, and the industry is obligated to up to $1 billion to help pay for TWIA's losses each year. So, Jay, you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, I would say that maybe one of the closest things to perpetual motion that you're going to see is TWIA legislation. Every session, we've made changes in the funding, we've made changes in the rates, we've tried to improve the building codes and to mitigate losses. it doesn't seem to matter. The coastal people don't want to pay more in rates. I think everyone recognizes that the funding through debt and public securities is not a good way to go because it's expensive, and then after a storm you issue bonds up to $1 billion and it takes 10 years to pay them off. And nothing prevents a storm from coming through every year. So, other options for funding, such as surcharges or other things, are being looked at and being discussed. I think it's going to be hard to find a consensus on that or on those issues now. It's been such a hot political issue. I think that's going to wind up more in a interim study that never took place this next year. And let's just pray that we don't have, if the funding is not changed, let's pray we don't have a storm, because that's going to require a lot of new debt and rate pressure, and whether TWIA could even pay for that. So I think there'll be a lot of wind and maybe not much action at the end of TWIA. Let's hope.
That was too easy.
Well, I listed a few. We've talked about a few. Are there any other big picture PNC issues you can see or hearing about coming up this session, or we will be keeping an eye out for?
No, I think you've hit it. I think one thing on the COVID, Albert, you've heard a lot of discussion at the federal level about getting some immunity to employers for getting sued if someone comes to their business and gets COVID on liability protection. I think that a lot of the business community would like to see that. They were pushing it at the federal level. I think that's going to now fall down at the state level, where the states may have to address that. It would not surprise me to see Governor Patrick, who is a proponent of that, and Governor Abbott support that in some form. And that will be pretty much of a partisan debate, I think, on that and stuff. But I would put that in the list of bills that are likely to be mentioned.
Okay, great. So I know for those listening, this is a lot of information at one time, but we'll have some more in-depth discussions on legislative issues as the session moves forward, some detail on some of the issues, PNC issues in particular, some of the background, pros and cons as well, later on during the year during these podcasts and other communications. We, on the ICT website, insurancecouncil.org, you'll be able to keep up with and find all of the bill tracking information. We have a track that keeps up with every PNC-related bill, along with a list of significant bills. And then we will continue to work with our other national trade partners as well as state trade partners. I think in the beginning I mentioned Jay's general counsel for AFAC. Jay also lobbies on behalf of AFAC, and ICT provides administrative support to AFAC and the rest of his legislative committee, so we'll be working with them as well. So keep an eye out on our website, on our member communications. It's probably also a good way to keep up with what's going on during session. Feel free to call either Angie or me if you have any questions about what's going on. I'm going to do a quick impromptu plug. I think Jay mentioned nuclear verdicts as an issue. We actually have a webinar coming up Tuesday, January 26th at 11 a.m. On nuclear verdicts. So a good opportunity. If you go to the website, you can find more information on that. So with that, Jay and Angie, I want to thank you for this very informative opening session. It will get interesting. We know that, with a lot of different things popping up. Some we probably never anticipated, and others we've come to expect. But look forward to working with y'all and talking to others as the session goes on about the issues that matters to Texas property and casualty insurance. With that, I'll close today's podcast. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of ICT on PNC. Find us online at insurancecouncil.org for more information about our organization or about the property and casualty insurance industry in Texas.